Hello guys, welcome back. Still cold, little weather update. Today we're talking about different ways to set up your Kamado Joe, and specifically if you're coming from a kettle over to a Kamado Joe, there's a few different things you need to think about. Now, as you all know, I started on the Weber kettle. It was my first charcoal barbecue. I cooked on it a lot, still cook on it from time to time, but I spent my early days learning how to set up that barbecue to get different heat zones. So typically on a kettle, you have direct and indirect cooking. We all know what it is, we all know what it does and what you use it for. So one is cooking directly over the coals, the other one is cooking indirect or offset to the coals. So everything on a kettle is thought of in two dimensions, if you think of it that way. So you have one level where your charcoal grate is, you have another level where your cooking grate is. Your coals can move anywhere on that charcoal grate, but it's still two-dimensional. You're still moving on that x-axis. So you can have the entire cooking grate covered in coals, you can have them pushed to one side and have an indirect side on the other side. You can split them in the middle like the Red Sea and have a 50-50 split method, but we're still working on one level. So that's what I was used to. Then we move across to the Kamado Joe, and I first got it. Now you're cooking in 3 dimensions. So you still have your left and right, side to side, you can bank the coals to either side, but now you have different cooking levels as well to deal with. So it adds a little bit of an extra twist into the mix. You see, where the two of them really differ is that extra height. So whilst you have a kettle where you have charcoal grate, charcoal sitting on top of it, and then your food directly over the top, that food will never get further away from them coals unless you move it to the indirect side. So again, you're working on the x-axis. Whereas the Kamado Joe has the 2 different cooking levels, so if your food is sitting on the lower level, it's right above those coals, it's searing hot, but if you put it on the higher level, it's further away. And for me, that was kind of an in-between zone between indirect and direct cooking. It's like indirect, direct cooking, because there's more space between the fire. Hope that makes sense. So it's been a year and a half since I've had this barbecue, and I would say it's only now that I'm starting to really take full advantage of it. I was still setting this thing up as a kettle, so if I wanted indirect, I would have banked all the coals to one side, food would have sat at the other side, and I'd have put a heat diffuser plate in. But I wasn't making use of the 2 levels that you have to cook on. And then also in the Classic 3 and the Big Joe 3, they both have 3 levels of cooking, so you can lift it even further up into the dome. So if you've just purchased yourself a Kamado Joe and you're wondering how you move from a kettle to a Kamado Joe and what the differences are in the setup, I wanted to put out some of my favourite setups that I find I use the most, so you can get started with those. Okay, first, probably the easiest of them all, is just plain direct cooking. Rather than just having one option in a kettle, you have 2 on the Kamado Joe. So high level direct cooking can be used for things like bone-in chicken or wings and things like that, that you would maybe traditionally do at a high heat indirect. They can be done now at the higher cooking level because you have a nice gap between the fire and the cooking grates. If you're wanting to do searing, then you can use low level, which is dropping them to their lowest level, and they're sitting just a couple of inches above the fire. So for things like steak or burgers that you want to get a real good sear on, you would drop that down right above the coals, and that gives you your maximum heat. So the joy of the Kamado Joe is that it has split cooking grates, so they are half moon grates, which means you can have the best of both worlds. So if you were doing a mixture of burgers and sausages and sort of your traditional barbecue fare, you could have one of those grates dropped right down below the coals and the other one up on a high level. And I tend to treat that high level one as a bit of a safe zone. So even though if there is coals in beneath it, if I'm cooking off something and I think it's getting a little bit too much colour, I can just move it up onto that other side. It'll continue to cook, but it's getting much less heat coming at it. So that command and conquer cooking system allows you to have 2 levels, and you can play about them with how close your food is to the fire. The closer it is to the fire, the faster it will cook and the more colour it will take on. Okay, next up then, we have Kamado Joe's version of the 50-50 split in a kettle. So coals all banked to one side and your indirect zone the opposite side. In the Kamado Joe, this is a little bit different because you don't have as much space to work with spreading the coals out. Plus you're still getting radiant heat coming from the ceramic itself. But the way I like to set it up is I will have one of the cooking grates on its lowest level with the coals directly underneath it. That's my searing zone. And then I will have one of the diffuser plates on the lowest level and the cooking grate immediately above that on the opposite side. So the diffuser plate is in there. Whilst there are no coals directly below it, it stops any warm air blowing up round and coming up underneath that food. So the diffuser just acts as a diffuser and keeps the air from coming up that way. So that gives you your indirect zone. You would use this for something like the reverse sear. So you would have your indirect side where you would cook off your big thick steak or something like the picanha. You would set it on the left hand side. I typically use the left hand side. Set it on the side with the highest cooking grate, bring it up to temperature, and then for the final sear you have that cooking grate sitting directly above the coals, and that's where you do all your searing. So again, another great setup. I wouldn't typically roast something this way, but if I want a nice mixture of direct and indirect cooking, that's how I would set it up. Okay, there are two other ones then that I find I would use quite a lot. The first one is the full indirect method. Now I was doing this wrong at the start. If I was wanting to do a roast on the barbecue and do a full indirect, I was setting it up more like the last method that we're going to talk about. So if I'm roasting now, I will light my fire on the bottom. Coals aren't banked, they're just spread out across the bottom. I'll put in the accessory rack and then put the heat deflectors on top of that. So the heat deflectors aren't sitting on their lowest level, they're actually raised out. That just gives more of a gap around the sides. If you're wanting to do a more high temperature roast, then that allows more airflow through the barbecue. I'll then set the drip pan on top of the heat deflector plates and the grates go on top. Now one issue with the Classic 2 is the clearance between the heat diffusers on that highest level and the cooking grates is a little bit small. Now I tend to use roasting tins as drip trays, and they don't quite fit in there. They kind of jiggle about on top of the roasting tin whenever you put the cooking grates on. But it's not a big deal, your food's not going anywhere. It's just, maybe I should be using shallower drip trays. Maybe I shouldn't be using drip trays at all. But I don't like making a mess of my diffusers. Oh, some of you eagle-eyed viewers may have spotted my nice shiny new diffuser. It sticks out like a sore thumb, but I had a bit of an issue with one cracking during all the cold weather. So got it replaced, happy days back cooking. Just glad it was only a diffuser plate. But that is my go-to roasting. So if I'm doing spatchcock chicken, if I'm doing roast beef, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I'm doing a roast, I will always set it up in that method. Whenever I first started, I was putting the heat diffuser plates on the lower setting, and that is more of a setup for low and slow because the gap around the outside of the heat diffuser plates isn't quite as much. So you're not getting that nice flow of air coming up around it, so it's better for lower temperature cooks. So heat diffuser plates on the lowest level, the accessory rack goes in with the drip pan sitting on top of it, and then the cooking grates are on the highest level. So if you're cooking something for a long time, having the heat diffuser plates in there plus the drip pan acts as an extra layer of diffusion, and it just ensures if something's in there it's not getting any kind of direct heat from the bottom. It is all coming up around the outsides and swirling around inside the barbecue. So I thought it might be beneficial just to warn you, if you're starting out in the Kamado, it's a slightly different way of thinking about setting up your barbecue if you're coming from a kettle. If you're coming from a gas barbecue, then it's all foreign to you, you're just going to have to figure it out. But that'll hopefully give you a little bit of a head start. So as I said earlier on, I am a year and a half into cooking in a Kamado Joe, and I'm only now feeling that I'm getting used to how to set it up, and I'm actually having good fun now playing around with the fire and playing around with food. And seeing how the proximity of the food to the fire cooks it slightly differently and gives you a different result. And that's what barbecuing is all about. It's about playing around with fire, playing around with food to try and come up with the flavours you want. And I feel like that 2-level cooking, or 3D cooking as I'm calling it, that'd be good practice for whenever I get the Classic 3, which is 3 levels. Then we're in a completely new territory and I'm going to have to learn it all again. So I want to know what you guys think. If you've just got into Kamado cooking and you're maybe coming from a kettle or a different barbecue, what kind of setups are you using? Did you know about these ones, or are there any new ones you think you should know about that are really useful? I'm more than willing to learn from it, so leave a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video and you found it useful, click the join button down below to become a channel member and join our monthly food challenges. Other than that, hit the subscribe button and I'll see you guys in the next video. Fucking cold. you know, making videos where you don't actually light a fire, I'm not a fan of them, especially in this weather. I save all these videos for summertime. Opted for a hat today. Lockdown here is getting out of control. Plus any extra layer at the minute is beneficial. I should have just lit this thing to keep me warm. Right, gonna go into the stove, warm my hands up. Bye.